Welcome back to Natural 2, our weekly unscripted tabletop and D&D role-playing game talk show. I am your host, James, and with me is also your host, Nathan. And this is a very special episode. If you are watching this, it may be because someone in your group has sent you the link and suggested that you watch it. And if that's the case, don't be afraid, don't be upset. It's going to be okay. We're going to talk to you about something that your group may be finding it difficult to address. Nathan?
We say many times on the show that there's no wrong way to play D&D, or we've said things very close to that, or I guess tabletop role-playing games as a whole. But I think the only caveat to that is the only time that you are playing a tabletop role-playing game wrong is when you are affecting somebody else's fun. That is kind of the line that most reasonable groups will draw, and that is certainly the line that I draw. And then anything beyond that, you're pretty free to do with as you will. But the topic that we were speaking of today, which is, I guess, power gaming or over-optimizing, is something that can, I guess, step over that boundary and push away some people's enjoyment or engagement or immersion. And it's always worthwhile to check yourself every so often and to try and take criticism for what it is and not to be defensive about things, though that is certainly sometimes my first reaction when I receive criticism. And if that is what you're getting from us, then try and understand that we are attempting to actually have a conversation and not just berate you.
And right off the bat, try not to take it personally. Like, there are terms that we have to use in order to talk about this, like affecting others' fun, and things of that nature. But I'm fairly certain that it's not something you were setting out to do on purpose. You're not trying to make someone in your group have a worse time. And it also doesn't mean that what you're doing is wrong necessarily across the board. It's just not a great fit at your current table. And one of the suggestions we might have may be to be honest with yourself about that, but we'll talk about that towards the end of the video. I think that's a last resort.
I think that's the most important thing to start off with, is I very rarely think that problems at a table or problem between players or anything in that spectrum is usually intentional, right? Like, a lot of these things spawn from over-enthusiasm, as far as my experience has taught me. And this is no different if someone is super excited about being mechanically efficient and knowing all the rules and how they meld together and having their character be as impossibly optimized. Like, that's not a bad thing, but once you do start going so far that the example that I would always kind of point to as this is a black and white, I guess, like, no zone or an area that will affect a lot of people, is when you start telling other people how to play because they're not playing in the most optimized way or they're not using their character correctly, which I think is a very common showcasing of this particular problem. And again, it's not intentionally harmful. I imagine the person doing this act is trying to give them more fun because they could be doing more damage or they could be assisting the combat in a better way. And to them, they're seeing, like, enjoyment being left on the table because they're not doing what they could possibly, right? But they don't see that they are inhibiting their agency or their role playing or their character's personality. And I guess that right there is kind of the point to make, is that is something you should probably refrain from doing, and potentially everyone is somewhat of a indulger of at some point or another.
And again, I know that it can be embarrassing, and have I have been on I've been on the other side of this conversation. Not strictly from a, like, min-maxing standpoint, but in another way that perhaps we'll talk about in a later video. So it's embarrassing. I get that. But try to feel good about being sent this video and having this conversation, because one of the things you can be sure that it means is that your group wants you in it. Your DM wants you at the table, or else they could just ignore the problem and marginalize you or kick you out. But obviously, that's not what they're doing.
So, what would be, I guess, your first piece of advice to someone that might be finding themselves creeping in on this boundary more often than not?
So, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be effective. And there is, for every gradient has two opposing ends. So there's somebody on the other end that has no idea what they're doing, hasn't even opened the book, and is useless in the crunchy parts of the game, like combat. But like you already mentioned, Nathan, there's a few things that we can assume safely about the situation. You are either, you the viewer are either perhaps giving somebody else at the table a hard time, most likely unintentionally, about their character and maybe the choices that they have made with it. Or you are giving the DM a hard time because you are trying to play one kind of game while he runs another, he or she. So I guess my first piece of advice is to do some self-reflection. If you don't already know, figure out which one of these is you. And again, try to be honest with yourself. Is there something that you find yourself saying every week or however often you play? Is there something that you find yourself doing? Is there a way that you question the DM that seems to come up over and over again? And find a way to remind yourself, whether it's, there's all kinds of ways to do this. You can make yourself a note and look at it before you go to your game. You can put something on yourself, the old string around the finger trick. You don't have to literally put a string around your finger, but I think you know what I mean. Something on you that you're going to see, or in your gaming supplies that you're going to see, that's going to remind you, without anyone else having to tell you, oh, right, that's the thing that I'm trying to cool it on. That's the thing I'm trying to back off of because it's creating friction. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I think the somewhat deceptive thing about, I guess, even giving advice or talking about this in general, is sometimes it's really hard to actually identify where feelings are being hurt, because not everyone is vocal about it, and communications is kind of a constantly iffy situation at best. I think a lot of hurt feelings can stem from things that when we say problem player in this scenario, it's not the, I guess, like, somewhat potentially toxic fueled term that's thrown around the internet. When it's problem player, I guess the best way we can define it right now is that there is something you could be doing better, which I guess in that scenario, everyone is a problem player. But anyway, I think most,
problem.
Yeah, I think most hurt feelings come from, like, memes, or what you think are memes, or jokes that have been treaded far too often, or little jabs or jives, I think that's a term, that are offered more than the receiver would enjoy. And this, in a more, I guess, like, straightforward approach, can be the things like, oh, DM, your combats are always so easy, which could easily come up from a party that is a wide variety of mechanically inclined individuals, where your character might be ready to fight a CR4 creature while everyone else is barely being able to fight the lonely goblins being thrown at them. So you're going to be seeing this combat as a cakewalk, while the DM is desperately trying to keep it equal for everyone, and finding you as the outlier is difficult. And then you accentuating that problem by poking fun at it, even if it is in a lighthearted manner, can grind on people's nerves and eventually kind of wear them down, and to the point they go online and go, yeah, this one player in my group always says my combats are easy, I'm gonna hit him with a red dragon, and so on and so forth. That's like, I think, the usual rotation of issues like this in different groups. So
Really, that's a really great point. I'm glad that you brought that up. So often we think that we are the life of the party, or we think that everyone is laughing with us with the jokes that we make, and the running gags that we find funny. But that is a really good point, that um even if people are, even if you think that people are laughing about something, a lot of times that can be a defense mechanism, or they're trying to avoid rocking the boat, or they're avoiding conflict. So we often have to check ourselves about the things that people won't call you on in the moment. It's pretty rare to come across somebody that is bold enough and or comfortable enough with you to say in the moment, that's not funny, dude. That we've made that joke 1,000 times. I'm tired of hearing of it. Maybe we can move on. That does not come up often.
well, that's a very easy way to break the flow of a game, and when the DM is obsessed with trying to keep the game alive, that's something that not a lot of DMs would stop to put forward, because it's going to probably sour everybody's mood in the moment.
I would also say that there's still room for you to have fun with your build and with your optimization, but take this as your cue to not put 100% of your energy, or even a majority of your energy, into that aspect. Your group wants you to explore another avenue of the game, um, and take it as an opportunity, take it as a challenge, right? You like min-maxing because you like solving puzzles, you like solving the equation, you like being effective. So you can think of it in those terms, that it's time to try being effective in a new facet of your campaign.
That's a solid point. I think somewhat correlated, and more or less my main point, is whenever there's videos about a problem player, these sins that my players do or anything of that general area, a lot of it comes down to sounding like, oh, you're enjoying this? Stop enjoying this because someone else isn't enjoying this. And while a little bit of that conversation is necessary, what I think is important is there's no reason to stop enjoying the things that you do enjoy. You just have to realize when you are stepping over that boundary that we've talked about.
It's a team sport, D&D. It's a team game, or really any tabletop system, not just D&D. It's a group activity, it's a team sport, and nobody likes a ball hog. Even stars who are undeniably excellent at the game have to hand off to somebody else sometime.
There's probably a good bit of a Venn diagram of the optimizer and the main character syndrome to some extent, which we don't have to get into like the depths of, but that is probably a somewhat adjacent conversation to be had here as well.
Yeah. If you find yourself, at least when initiative is rolled, being the main character, then don't let other people have some time in the sun too. Or if somebody has one of the bad guys in hand, maybe you can let them get last hit, right? Or no kill stealing D&D isn't that kind of game normally, but uh, you know, let folks get their numbers up too.
But one of the things you mentioned early on is that you might even want to approach this subject, or you, the viewer, approach this topic, or I guess piece of advice, as maybe the group that you're in fundamentally just isn't prepared to fit the puzzle piece that you are. There are a variety of groups and a plethora of groups for a reason, because they all play very different versions of tabletop role-playing games or D&D. So there are certainly games that are way more crunchy and built for every character to be as optimized as possible, because if not, you're going to die in session one. And if that's the kind of game you want, then you should try and seek that out. And if you find yourself in a game that you are fully not prepared to slot into, then you should try and recognize that. But I think more often than not, there's a lot of wiggle room to adjust in the group that you are, unless it is very clear that you are not the proper fit. And if that's the case, the group will usually kind of tell you, whether verbally or kind of with hints or general, you know, non-verbal communication, where there might be some adjustments necessary. There might be cues that you're not picking up on that you can straightforward just ask them. One of the ones I've kind of seen in this topic is people that put a lot more effort into their mechanics of their characters and not so much the character of their characters. Wow, that was not an easy sentence to say.
Personality of their
Yeah,
characters.
when they are approached by another player and tried engaging in the story of the person that they have brought, they just kind of disregard it or push it away or kind of, send it to the background because that's not what they're interested in. And you might see that as like, oh, they got the sign that my guy's straightforward. There's nothing cool there, nothing interesting to learn. He's a badass, does his thing. But you might actually be, I don't want to say harming someone's fun, but kind of, damaging their expectations if they were prepared to have this dialogue with you, this connection with you, to add to the story, to engage in a part of the game they really enjoy, and you just kind of shut it down because it's not important to you. So
I want to reiterate that when it comes to examining whether the group you're in is the group for you, that is the last step. Don't assume that don't assume that that's the case here. Don't assume that what is needed is for you to hit the road. But as long as we're talking about self-reflection and being honest with yourself, if you're finding yourself thinking, I already am doing the minimum amount of crunch that I find fun, I don't want to be in this campaign if I have to dial it back anymore, then again, that's okay. You're not wrong for those desires. Just embrace them and make the appropriate decision.
I always find myself like somewhat vague at the end of all of our videos, and this is probably not going to be an exception, because the overall like vibe as far as like my addition to this conversation is being more self-aware, and this applies to everybody, but for this scenario it's rather vital. If you are not judging people's reactions or gauging the, I guess, like acceptance of your behavior with your group, or even the addition you have to the game, I think there's a fair amount of people or players or characters, whatever you want to end up calling them, that think they have a really large impact on the game because they focus so heavily on mechanics and they dish out the most damage and they, do all this prep work before the game. But when it comes time to reminisce about the story and the adventure and the friendships that were built both in-game and out of game, they're kind of left behind because their character was just a tool. And the most memorable moments were, oh, remember when he killed that dragon in one shot? Yeah, that was cool. And that's it. That's like the memory of this shared interaction that you have with everybody. And so if you're finding yourself having those characters more often than not, then perhaps that's a good sign to try and get a little bit deeper, or at least try and spread your interest into different aspects of the game or anything of that sort. But it always kind of comes down to see your impact that you're leaving behind and then adjust accordingly.
It's it's always satisfying to deal a big hit in the moment, or have that big damage number come up, or take down a lot of monsters in one turn. That's fun. Nobody's saying that's not fun. But you're absolutely right that when people look back on that session, on that arc, on that campaign down the road, they're not going to remember what the number was. They'll remember what it meant.
Mm-hmm.
The way that it turned the plot, the way that it changed the trajectory of the story.
Mm-hmm.
That's what has lasting impression.
Ooh, I certainly should have brought this up earlier, but I'm remembering it now, so I'm gonna throw it in this time. One of the other problems I think kind of correlates with this general kind of player, which is a somewhat loose term at best, but when you try to be a master of everything to the point that you are driving over other people's specialties is an issue that I've seen a couple different times, where someone tries to be a character with such high, passive perception and these saves that are insane, or their AC is so high, or their stealth is this high, or they're this good at, intimidating and persuading, and they can tank this much. It's like, okay, what can you not do? And it's like, oh, well, my performance check is like a +1. That's my lowest stat. And it's like, oh God, I was worried for a moment. And I think that is a bit more of an obvious, like, not want to say red flag, but a sign that you are putting a limit on other people's engagement, because there is, if you're a player in a group with a player like this, and you're like, oh yeah, my person's a rogue, they grew up and that was like their main thing, I'm gonna try and sneak into the bakery and so we can get the gem back, and you're like, well, my guy's a barbarian, but his stealth is +3 and yours is +2, why don't I do it? And it's like, yeah, no, that's not good.
Yeah, respect people's hats that they want to wear as much as possible. That's another really good point. Just, again, it's a team game. It's a group activity. Being a party of one is not as impressive as it may seem.
Yeah, I mean, you should aim to have a group of friends beside you and not an audience cheering you on.
That's a quotable quote right there. Put that in the short.
Yeah, put it on a shirt. Put it in a short.
Yeah, a shirt in a short.
I mean, I think that's kind of a good through line, is a lot of these problems, or the things that we've brought up, stems a lot from your perspective of the group or your role in the group. You're not the hero, you're not the main character, you're not the, I guess, like the most powerful. You're another piece of the puzzle that makes the whole tapestry, or image, I guess I should say. Yeah, and so a lot of our advice is kind of like spirals around that general topic.
So I think that's more or less all that we have to say on this subject. Once again, it was a good thing. It's a positive thing that you were sent this, that you watched it all the way to the end. Please feel good about it. And like and subscribe.
If you don't feel good about it, tell us why you don't in the comments below.
Or if this helped you, or if there's another thought that didn't occur to us in this conversation, we want to know that too. So,
and there's certainly plenty of arguments that I would somewhat get behind that oppose some of the things I've put out today. Like, you have to be a certain amount of optimized to complete things, and that's a very true statement, but it's all a balancing act, I think, in the end.
Yeah, don't overcorrect is a good piece of general advice. Always.
Well, that's all I have, sir.
And if you feel left out, or if the player that is struggling in your group was not covered by this video, I have a feeling that we're going to have others. So
we'll slowly go across the whole lineup.
Yeah, look forward to it. Honestly.
Yeah.
And until next time.
Have a good one.